So it is my understanding that you guys did the very first part of this chapter 23, the 19th century.
Right.
But it would make no sense to continue without just reading this. So let's read the next, this one and the next one, and then we comment. Again, I think it's very important to remind everyone every time that I read this book that this is not a book of history, okay? That if you are really interested in the world history of Europe, you should get a history book. This is a book in which Emmanuel gives the perspective of a sequence of events of the maturation of progress of humankind. And that perspective is from the spiritual world. It's not so necessary as a historian take notes of facts happening here on earth while incarnate. It's the perception of the spirits watching the development of our progress and our struggles with their assistance, trying to do the best that they can without interfering in our free will, without taking away from us the right of making mistakes and deal with the consequences of those mistakes, because this is part of progress. This is part of maturation. So again, you may see things in this book that is not completely factual with the history as it's written. But again, that's not the objective of Emmanuel of this book. He wants to give a overall synopsis of how we go in this pathway on the way to the light, leaving the shackles, the mud of ignorance to reach the light, all the steps that we have taken. The right, the wrong, the ones that I have to adjust, the ones that I have to fix, the ones that I have to correct, but it's all our doing, with their assistance, but without their interference. Okay? So, yes?
We start on the 19th century again, right?
Yes, please. So you can read the 19th century and the next one, and then we comment.
Okay, okay. After the revolution, with Napoleon gone from Europe's political scene, the Congress of Vienna met in 1815 to adopt sweeping measures for rebuilding the European nations. Okay, Laura. Okay. Diplomacy led to memorial accomplishments by taking advantage of the glorious experiences of those years of extermination and revolution. Louis XVIII, Count of Provence, and the brother of Louis XVI was placed on the French throne, reestablishing the old dynasties. The church, too, got its share of the large inventory, restoring to it the countries where it had founded its perishable reign. A breath of peace reanimated those collectivities exhausted by fratricidal battles, making way of the indirect intervention of invisible forces in the patrimonial reconstruction of the great nations. Many reforms, however, were implemented after the bloody activities that had begun in 1789. Such renewals were more extensive and numerous in France especially. Besides benefiting the government of Louis XVIII by replicating the English system, several other liberal principles of the revolution were adopted, such as the equality of citizens before the law and freedom of worship. These reforms established a regime of individual responsibility in the mechanism of every sector of the state, in addition to all its political and social advances. Accustomed to all the arbitrariness of its dogmatic nature, Even the church acknowledged the limitation of its powers regarding the masses and resigned itself to the new situation. Political independence of the Americas. Most of the peoples of the planet that had been following the course of events sought to eliminate the last vintage of monarchical absolutism in order to approach republican ideals or of to implementing implement a constitutional regime that restricted the powers of rulers. The Americas, destined to receive the sacred experiences of Europe for the civilization of the future, sought to apply the grand principles of the French philosophers to their political life on their way to a more complete emancipation. Following the example of the English colonies, the four viceroyalties of Spain struggled for their own independence. In Mexico, patriots would not tolerate any other king than their own. And in South America, with the action of the Bolivia and the deliberations of Congress of Tucumán in 1816, the colonies of South America claimed their political freedom. In 1822, Brazil too raised its banner of emancipation with Pedro I, attended to the mission of the Brazilian people in the civilization to come. It is worth noting that the efforts of the invisible plane in maintaining Brazil's territorial integrity while the rest of the continent was being split into smaller republics.
Thanks, Aurelio.
Okay.
So João covered the whole French Revolution, and I'm sure he went. What led to the French Revolution in a more enlightened way was basically the so-called the Enlightenment period, right? That starts around 1680, 1685, most books would say, which was not a small step towards scientific progress, but was a big jump. Okay, it's as if we have just waken up from a 1,000 years of sleeping, of being a state of hibernation, we human, the horrible Middle Age, and you finally woke up hungry for knowledge, you're hungry for have the freedom of thinking, expressing thoughts, hunger for knowledge, and that was the period of a very significant intellectual progress. It starts in individuals like Bacon, the philosopher, English philosopher, with knowledge is power. This is a very strong statement to go from power no longer being physical, no longer being dictated by a spiritual ruler, but power being something that you conquer by yourself through your effort, knowledge. Knowledge is power. I think it's an extremely important statement. Bacon also putting effort in distribution of knowledge to others, distribution of books, saying that the most important thing that you could do is educated people, provide books. That's a big change. Also at a time where before all the knowledge was restricted by the hands of very, very few, and with an effort to keep that knowledge in the hands of few so you can oppress the ignorant ones. That is a big radical change and try to provide education to all instead of limited to a few. That's a very important concept. And then in sciences, you have Galileo Galilei, you have Kepler, you have Isaac Newton, everyone at this period of time, from about 1885 to 1685, I'm sorry, to the beginning of the 1800s, 1850s, and continues to the day, of course, with the tremendous technological advance that we are experiencing right now. But also in the areas of philosophy, now Descartes, I think, the For I Am, and Kant, and so many others that come at this period of time, the people were more awakened to explore a little bit more. And in order to explore, you need freedom. And in order to have freedom, you have to liberate yourself from some old paradigms. All of those things that combined to the idea of the French Revolution, a very noble idea, liberté, égalité, fraternité, right? Freedom, equality, and fraternity. I mean, it's a purely Christian thing right then and there. There was supposed to be a revolution to bring back those three very powerful elements that achieved a tremendous amount of its goal as it was planned by the great spirituality. Unfortunately, the big leader of that movement, Napoleon, once again, allowed the desire for power underline the noble objectives of the revolution. The flag, liberty, equality, fraternity was preserved, was very strong. It spread throughout the world, spread especially to the Americas. It did take this very wonderful positive consequence. But at the same time, Napoleon, as they say, is the reincarnation of Julius Caesar, allowed the emperor to prevail over the one that's supposed to enlighten. And put entire Europe in a state of war, try to conquer the entire Europe. And upon his defeat, finally by 1815, or 1814, some books would say, the countries of Europe decided to get together. They created this Congress of Vienna. And also a very positive thing that happened there is that they decided to unite to prevent that ever again a ruler from one nation would invade and try to create domination of the other countries of the other regions, that they would unite in a coalition to defeat that ruler. That another good thing of this Vienna, if it didn't work as expected, at least the goal was very noble and objective, for a better distribution of the bellical powers, that one country should not have tremendous bellical arsenal much greater than any other nations, to keep some kind of balance, a more homogeneous power amongst all the countries, and that one country should not exert that much influence upon another country. And you know that bellical power is perhaps, unfortunately, this world today, the big divider of waters. Now, the one who has the greatest potential to create a destruction really is the one who can scream loud and get away with things. Not as much as as in the past, but still today, the bellical power is what really establish the hierarchy of power. Also, something important that happened this time is that the church lost some of its hard grip upon society. You can't be seek for freedom. You can't seek freedom for expression, to explore. I think therefore I am being completely controlled by an institution, being completely controlled by dogmas. So the church lost some power, and the church understood that. The church started feeling the pressure of competition with the Protestants. You talk primarily Europe here, right? And they're not dumb. They understood that there was a change in the air, and they have to somehow accommodate, or they would lose even more. So they did accommodate, which was a very big change. The church makes a lot of change in that period that make them much more easy to be dealt with. So all those things has happened in Europe at that period of time. And in reality, in North America, those who left Europe went to North America. They already went with that model, with that quality of that state of mind. They already went to North America seeking the French Revolution idea, liberté, égalité, fraternité. They already come here with that spirit in mind. They want to be free. They didn't want it to be conditioned to a greater power. They already seeking freedom when they arrived here. And in South America, Central America, was mostly the rich kids that the daddies send them to study in Europe. They go to Europe and they learn about this new movement, social philosophical things that is happening, this idea of liberty, equality, and fraternity, and they bring that to the Americas, and they start to spread these goals. So in reality, something that backfired from the noble, rich people living in South Central America send the kids to be educated in Europe, and they come back with this different paradigm that was happening over there. And that is spread like wildfire, and other revolutions start to take place. And basically the whole Central South America, except for Brazil, naturally, there was Spanish colony. It started, especially with Simon Bolivar, to conquer freedom. And once that is done, then it started to break down into different countries as we see today, or a little bit more as we see today. What was one big Spanish colony then becomes to have different countries. Now, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Peru, Colombia, Mexico, and in Brazil, being like the only child, so to say, in the Americas, colonized by Portuguese. Also, the same thing. It was basically the young kids went to Europe and found these new paradigms and the new philosophical, social ideas that bring that to Brazil. They also made it impossible for Portugal to maintain the colony and the establish freedom for them. But all those things was really started, including the French Revolution, with the movement of the Enlightenment, with the freedom from the religious uphold, with the desire to gain knowledge. And all those philosophers that now are conquering knowledge, but no more than that, have a movement of passing knowledge to the crowd, to the people. And once the people become enlightened, they will react. And all those revolutions had taken place. I'm not big in history. Anyone who wants to comment or want to add anything to it, I would appreciate. If not, we move on.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. We're
You
next.
you waiting for me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah. It's
I'm
okay.
not.
It's okay.
I'm sorry you still got a book.
No, no. That's it. Okay, okay. We had Alan Kardec and his collaborators. Right. Okay. There they are. There you are.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The 19th century unleashed a torrent of enlightenment in the world, with every country making strides toward useful and invaluable reforms. The sacred teachings of Spiritism was on the verge of being heard by suffering humankind. In his magnanimity, Jesus would break the sacred bread of hope and faith for all hearts. On his mission of enlightenment and consolation, however, Allan Kardec would be accompanied by a plethora of companions and collaborators whose regenerative work would manifest not only in matters of a doctrinal nature, but in every area of intellectual activity of the 19th century. Science in those days made a large strides that would lead it to the heights of the 20th century. The progress of the telegraphical art influenced all centers of human endeavor, giving birth to mobile libraries, magazines, and numerous newspapers. The ease of communication via telegraph and railway lines established direct exchange among nations. Literature was filled with noteworthy and immortal works. The laboratory was permanently removed from the sacristy, thereby increasing the well-being of civilization. The the dry cell battery was developed, magnetic induction was discovered, and the telephone and phonograph were invented. The first furrows were plowed in the field of radio telegraphy. Spectral analysis and the unity of the physical energies of nature were discovered. Atomic theory was exploited, and physiology established definitive foundations with comparative anatomy. The arts showed new life. Painting and music expressed a lofty aspect of advanced spirituality. The heavenly gift of interchange between the visible and invisible worlds reached the planet in this wave of undescribable enlightenment. In accordance with the promises of Christ, Spiritism, the consoler of humankind, arrived to enlighten human beings and prepare their hearts for the full use of all the wealth of heaven.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
So in the midst of all these revolutions taking place, all those big radical changes being taking place in our lives, not only in Europe, but throughout the world, with this spreading of the idea of liberty, equality, fraternity, with the ideas that one should seek knowledge, with the good and bad side of things that we can't be controlled by anything to do with spirituality. We do have a tendency when we are oppressed by something too far to the right, We have a tendency when free from that thing too far to the right to move as far as you can too far to the left, which also not a good idea. Balance is important in our lives. Homeostasis is something important in our life. To be able to correlate. I'm sorry, instrument. I have two toddlers make a lot of noise in the house today. To be able to live in harmony with scientific progress and religiosity is very important in our lives also, but it is a normal tendency that when you feel oppressed, prisoner by one thing, once you are free from that thing, you run as far as away from that thing. So there was a time also in which people will start to look at religion as something negative. God is dead, you no longer need that. Science will resolve our problems. We don't need to deal with sciences, to deal with religions anymore, and to move a little bit too far to the opposite side as well, which is also dangerous. Again, every time that you go too far from the center, you become a radical, and once you become a radical, you will start to lose the ability to reason properly. And it's a little bit of that was happening at that, perhaps a lot of that was happening at the time as well. We need something to bring back to the balance, not too far right, not too far left, not completely a prisoner of religious dogmas, but not completely separated from spirituality. So it was a proper time for this promised consoler to come, because pretty much that's what spiritism brings to us. It brings the ability of we to live in perfect harmony with these two things, the intellectual and the moral. The intellectual progress, the technology, the sciences coexisting together in harmony with spirituality. That it's all one, basically. The progress is one. We separate for that because moral and intellectual, but in reality is one. One kind of needs the other. There is a symbiotic relationship of the two. And if we just let one side grow, just one wing go, we cannot fly. We need both wings growing together at the same height, so we can be able to fly and conquer the light that we seek. So there was a good time for spiritism to come. But in order to spiritism to come and make some kind of sense, intellectual progress had to come ahead of time. It was important that we experience more abstract phenomena, that we understand and be comfortable with them. Electricity, a lot of energies that it's there that plays a major role in our lives, but you don't see, it's not palpable, but it's there. Those concepts have to be commonplace in our lives if you are going to accept spiritism with all the abstracted, invisible powers that spiritism brings to us. So the so-called associates of Kardec was also in the scientific field, where the guys who brought in the understanding of microbiology, that there is very meaningful, important lives, but it's beyond our ability to see. The concept of electricity, the development of the ability to write and publish in great scale. Very recently of that, I mean, even if you have written the Spirit's book 100 years before, would not go anywhere because there was no way to publish in larger scale. So it was right then and there, that period, that was developed the ability of publishing in larger scales. That was the time that was developed the telegraph. Now you could have communications that could get answers of spirits from different parts of the world, because now there was the telegraph available. So all those things were collaborators of Kardec, not only in the purely spiritual sense, but the ones that provided all these necessary intellectual development for spiritism to be able to rise. It would have been possible to try, and of course, have the ability, the freedom of expression, the freedom of agglomerate and study things that at one point would be prohibited. Actually, at the time of Kardec, Kardec had to ask special permission to the emperor to open the Spiritist Society, and they had to open, and they have to use the argument that it was purely scientific, because if had said something more of the spiritual nature, probably would not be allowed it. And they would always make sure, verify that it was not some kind of conspiracy. There was Europe was very concerned again with the Vienna Treaty. Very careful, make sure that people not agglomerated to try to create another revolution and take over this, take over that. So they were very, very careful. But we did have the ability to express ourselves, to agglomerate and discuss things, naturally with some kind of permission at that time. Those are all factors that are extremely important. That's why Emmanuel called the collaborators of Allan Kardec in order to bring this doctrine to us. Comments, questions? No?
Elmo?
Yep.
Just a general question on the phrase, in accordance with the promises of Christ, Spiritism, and the Consoler of humankind. Was the Consoler of humankind considered to be Kardec, or was it sort of an alignment with Christ and Kardec?
The Consoler of humankind is Spiritism itself.
Oh, I see. Okay. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So you remember when Christ said, I am going, but are you not going to leave you orphans? I shall send a consoler that will reveal things that I could not reveal now, and Father explains things that I have said now, and remind you of things that you will forget. The consoler, the Spirit of truth, that will stay with you forever.
Oh, right. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying.
So we believe, no, I'm sure there is billions of people that would disagree with us, but we think that this consoler is spirituous, because spirituous does exactly that. It fathers explain things that could not be explained at that time. Again, all this intellectual development were necessary for us to grasp some abstract concepts. Freedom of speech would be necessary first. So there's a lot of things that was necessary to come before spirituals, to come before the consoler, so the consoler could come in, bring its message, and stay with us forever. If spirituals had come, let's say 100 years earlier, it would be crushed like a fly on the wall. All this social, philosophical, scientific development was prerequisite for the consoler to come. And we think the consoler of humankind is Spiritism itself.
Mm.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elmo.
Sure. So social sciences?
Okay, social sciences. The field of philosophy did not escape. Go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, the field of philosophy did not escape this renewing torrent. Aligning with the physical sciences, the sciences of the soul could not tolerate the influence of the absurd dogmas of the church. The Christian denominations, troubled and divided, experienced a deadly struggle in their places of worship. Rather than exemplifying the divine master's fraternity, they surrendered to all the excesses of the sectarian spirit. Consequently, philosophy retreated into its transcendent negativism, applying the principles of rational and materialist science to its own expressions. Schopenhauer was an eloquent example of this pessimism, and in spite of their sincerity in the vast rim of ideas, the theories of Spencer and Kant bolstered our assertions. The Roman Church was guilty of such deviations, dominating by iron and fire, and being closed to the rulers of the world. It had not bothered with founding the spiritual kingdom of hearts beneath its welcoming shade. Rather than exemplifying the Nazarene, it had amazed all sorts of useless assets, thereby intensifying the needs of the suffering masses. It extorted instead of giving and preserved ignorance instead of spreading the light of knowledge.
Okay. So the church, of course, talking the Roman Catholic Church. That in its beginning, after a long persecution of Christians by the Roman Empire, it eventually become the religion of the empire when the empire was mostly collapsed already. Constantino was perhaps his last trial to revive the empire, adopt Christianity as the official religion of the empire, and organized what is today the Catholic Church, being himself the first pope, and created a system of hierarchy that was supposed to enlighten the masses, the entire globe, of the teachings of Christ. He spread Christianity on its simple form to, to all. But just like Napoleon, the church also became fascinated and by power, and become hypnotized by the ability to maintain control of things, and unfortunately went in a path that was pretty much more antichrist than Christ itself, with the desire to conquer material power, material possess things, building churches with the walls of gold. And one have to ask, where is God, where is Christ in this church? I mean, what did Christ ever possessed? As much as we know the clothes of his body, perhaps, and basically went on a power hunger that created wars, that created dogmas that was meant to empower themselves and become more and more distant to Christianity itself, the pure Christianity. By that I mean the teachings of Christ. So much so that at one point Jesus has asked St. Francis of Assisi to go and rebuild his church, right? And there was an eloquent attempt by the divine spirituality to redirect the church to the true Christianity, and instead of following the examples of St. Francis of Assisi, they put him at the side of there, let him do these things after they were not able to stop him, but did not really follow him so much so that the Franciscans is something belonging to the church, but it's a small fraction of the church because it was way too Christian for the church of that time. And culminated to the Protestant movement when the excesses of the church become unbearable to some who had a more true Christian ideologies. When it comes to the point that the church was basically selling real estate in heaven, you could buy your property in heaven. That was the last drop for many, and the Protestant movement began. And the same movement that began in its purity and its noble idea of combat the excess of the church to establish a church that is of Christ and for Christ, also fell to deliver this goal, this objective, and got lost in its own objective, got lost in creating its own dogmas. Most of them actually retrieving back to the First Testament and made all his dogmas based on the First Testament, and not really on the teachings of Christ, to the point that sometimes for some of those groups, we listen to them for one entire hour, and they will bring quotations after quotations after quotations of the Bible, not one single one of Christ, all from the First Testament, completely alienating the new paradigm that Christ brought. So it was important that another group incarnate would try to retrieve Christianity to its most basic, simple form, the teachings of Christ, period. Simple, without dogma, without ritual. And that's exactly what Spiritism does to us. Tremendous advancement in the social sciences at that time as well, not only in the physical studies, the psychologists, the social workers, the education system, all that moved to Kardec himself, one of the revolutionaries in the world of pedagogy, but also this necessity of creating the harmony between the intellectual and the spiritual, the intellectual and the moral. Again, with people moving so far to the left, afraid of being once again become a little puppet at the hands of the church, and if you try to express your thoughts, your ideas, you end up in fire. They would say, no, we don't need sciences, you don't need you don't need the church, you don't need religion, you don't need God, period. Sciences take care of everything. Science will answer all of our questions. There was a need to create that balance. And Spiritism come with that task, to create that balance, to retrieve those smart, eloquent minds who were now afraid of engaging spirituality once again, to see that there is place for both spirituality and science, that we should exercise both spirituality and science, reason with spirituality. And those who saw that did become followers of Spiritism. So we had that division. Those too far to the right would reject the Spiritism 100% because it's a demoniac thing, it's thinking of the devil. And on the other side, the ones too far for the left would say that the Spiritism think of the dumb, of the gullible ones. And the Spirit sits in the middle, not, sit in the middle, be attacked by the religious group who sees this as being the work of the devil, and on the ones on the far on the other side think of dumb people who is gullible, who is was not using reason, and only those who could move more towards the center. And again, always talking about moving towards the center, but not move towards the center at the ground level, because that center is not really at the same level as the far right and the far left. Is above, is moving upwards towards the middle, not at the same level. Those who are able to move upwards towards the middle. And why is it upwards? Because you learn from both sides. As we move toward the center, we start learning from both sides, so you progress, so you move up. Those who move up towards the center were the ones who embraced Spiritism. And hopefully that's why you are here right now. Comments? All right, so let's go next.
Okay. The task of the missionary. Allan Kardec's task was difficult and complex. He had to reorganize the fallen edifice of the faith and lead civilization back to its deep religious foundations. Attentive to the mission of harmony and fraternity of the Americas, the invisible plane located the first tangible manifestations from the spirit world on their soil in the famous town of Hydesville, New York, provoking the broadest spectrum of opinions. The spark originated on America shores has had the consolidation and victories of democracy. Europe sought to adopt these new and generous ideas, which found the disciple at his post of prayer and watchfulness, ready to answer the calls of the Lord. Numerous direct co-workers helped him with his sacred effort, developing his synthesis in glorious complements. With its social and political institutions, the planet had reached a period of grand transformations that would require more than a century of painful and redemptive struggle. Spiritism would be the essence of new conquests, conducting hearts back to the gentle gospel of Christianity.
So we come to a point in our intellectual progress that we are ready to receive the promised consoler. And when you say that we are ready, it doesn't mean that we are going to embrace a thing at the very first time that we see it. It doesn't mean that once it comes to us, say, oh, but obvious, it's clear that this is the pathway to go. It requires a struggle. Okay, it requires times for this idea to maturate in our mind, for us to digest this new paradigm or these ideologies. It doesn't happen immediately, even though we are ready for it. It's interesting that in our leadership meetings, we tell the spirits that you are ready, and the first thing they'll say is no. And to begin with, there's nothing to be ready about it. I know what I want, and this is not it. Because the fact is that they are ready, otherwise they would not be there, otherwise would not be having that conversation. But not even them are aware of it yet. So when we say humankind have reached the maturation, they were ready to be introduced to spirituals, doesn't mean they were ready to accept it immediately. They were ready to leave behind paradigms, dogmas that they had living with it reincarnation after reincarnation after reincarnations for a long and long and long time. It's almost like it's built in a system, and you have to erase that slowly, create room for something else to replace it. But we are ready, and it comes in its time, and it comes where all the scientific, social, philosophical required development was going on, because it didn't happen, it stopped, it was going on, and it's still going on, of course, right? And you have to think the Americas was still a place kind of free of heavy, deep karmas, right? The America not only did not because being a young new world didn't have time to drop the ball so many times yet, basically, right? We may say that a baby is pure. It is pure because it didn't get a chance to grow up and make mistakes yet. It grew up and they have a time to express its own mind yet, right? So yeah, it's pure. It's pure because it didn't get a chance to mess things up. And America was pretty much that, right? It was the new world, was the new country, and those arrived here, as I just said, with the noble goals of the French Revolution, of the Enlightenment movement, liberté, égalité, fraternité. So it was quite reasonable that the very first spiritualistic movement had started here in Hydesville, New York, with the famous Fox Sisters. And were not able to continue over here, perhaps because of the very radical position of those new Christians, the ones that was freeing themselves from the oppressions of the church, but at the same time creating oppressive dogmas of their own here in the Americas as well. And later on would carry a very difficult karma of slavery, which make it difficult for the spirit, for the doctrine to expand over here. It have to move cross Atlantic, went to Europe, where there was in Paris, which was besides all the karmas that France did have and had to endure, and that is now going to read soon here. The responsibility that France would have to deal with the responsibilities of its mistakes. But Paris was indeed the city of light. It was indeed a conglomeration of very enlightened individuals. It was indeed the cultural center of the world, and most of these noble goals, philosophical ideas that spread toward the world, pretty much it was concentrated in Paris, and was from Paris that would go everywhere else. So it made completely sense that Spiritism also started there in Paris, and from there it spread throughout the rest of the world, but not without all the difficulties that any new paradigm we will face, we will encounter. Again, Spiritism sit in a very difficult position that was rejected by the most religions and by the most intellectuals. And both sides of the have to move towards the center in high upper objective to be able to reach to find Spiritism. Of course, many did. Of course, many did not, and they find Spiritism to be more than anything an enemy. The church would see Spiritism as an enemy, um, and the purely materialistic to see Spiritism as an enemy, of course. So the task was difficult. What could have started and continue in the Americas could not hold, develop roots, and had to go to the City of Light, and there where things started. But the very first movement with the movement of Spiritism / spirituality being something more outside of the spectrum of the superstitions of the dogmatic was done first here in Hitsville. Open a parenthesis, this was not the very first time that a mediumistic phenomenon took place in the world. Mediumistic phenomena is happening throughout humankind. Mediumistic phenomena is happening from prehistory to history and will always happen everywhere in this world. To have what we're talking about here is a mediumistic phenomenon being documented, being outside of the spectrum of the superstitious, the mythical, and the mystical, something to be evaluated within the reason. That was the very first movement that we know of here in New York, Hillsville, that then the movement went back or traveled transatlantic back to Paris and developed in Paris. But again, mediumship always existed. Will always exist throughout this global. Everywhere there is one incarnate, there's a very good likelihood that there is a discarnate, and they will interact, create a mediumistic phenomena. All right, comments, questions? Okay.
Okay. Okay.
And it's just one more thing that I find important here, we sort of missed, is when Emmanuel said spirituals would be essence for these new conquests, conducting hearts back to the gentle gospel of Christianity. So they go, spiritism naturally is exactly that, is to bring us back to the teachings of Christ, pure and simple. You may hear me speaking of the first testament of the Bible, or basically the Jewish Bible. Absolutely no disrespect, absolutely no neglect. It's important, it's extremely important. Jesus himself said, I didn't come to change the law, but to reinforce it. But it is important that we did reason, the reasoning the spirituals bring to us, that to separate divine laws from man-made laws. Man-made laws are just perfect as we are, perfect laws must adjust itself to progress of humankind. Man-made laws are necessary to fulfill a need on that period of time, and when that need no longer exists, that law no longer needs to exist as well, right? In a place where everyone, or at least let's say 85% of the population, drives with lights on 24 every time they do the day and at night, you don't have to have a law that demand that you have the lights on, because everybody does already. In a place where everybody is educated and it picks up, do not drop things on the floor. If they find something on the floor, they'll pick that up. You don't have to have a law that fines people, I don't know, $50, $100 when they drop things on the floor, because people don't do it. If there is a law that punishes people for dropping things on the floor, it's because people do it. So man-made laws needs to change as we change. Divine laws are unchangeable because they are perfect. And if they're perfect, they don't need to be changed. So when I speak of the First Testament, I speak with most respect. We need to go and visit also the First Testament, learn of the divine laws that are there, and have the ability to separate man-made from divine laws in nature. And unfortunately, many of the Protestant sectors of Christianity who broke up with the Catholic Church for very good reasons have unfortunately created their own dogmas that also are in nature against the teachings of Christ. And Christianity comes exactly for that, to bring spiritualism exactly with this objective: bring the teachings of Christ pure and simple. Understand what he brought to us, understand his teachings, not as a religious leader, but as a leader, period. You don't need to attach any word to the leader. He leads us. He does not leads us as the leader of a church. He leads us as a leader of humanity. So we need to take his, unfortunately, the problem is that Christ right now is a prisoner, and that Christianity is a prisoner inside of those institutions. We need to take Christ out and put Christ in our daily lives, in our place of work, in the subways and everywhere else. So live in accordance to his teachings as a model for social harmony, not as a religious thing. Spiritism has the ability to bring that to us to begin with, because it's not a religion. We could not have religious aspiration if we are not a religion. All right, we can continue now.
Collective trials in France. We must point out the dolorous trials of France after its excesses during the Revolution and the Napoleonic campaigns, the revolutions of 1830 and 1848, which resulted in painful redemptions on the part of both individuals and collectivities, were followed by the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. Due to causes known only in the spirit realm, France, that great Latin nation, was crushed and defeated by Bismarck's proud Germany, which, intoxicated and blinded by victory, would in turn merit the bitter sorrows of 1914 and 1918. Paris had watched with certain indifference the suffering of the condemned during the reign of terror, and had attended the dreadful spectacles of the scaffold and applauded the oppressors. Thus, it suffered want and starvation in 1870 before falling into the hands of ruthless enemies on January 28, 1871. The political impositions of Emperor William in Versailles and the collective bitterness of the French people in the days of defeat meant the redemption of the great Latin nations' aberrations.
Okay, thanks.
The
So as we always say, every effect generates consequences, and we need to deal with the consequences of our actions and have to deal with the consequences of our inactions, which is equally important. Very often we lift our hands up and say, but I didn't do anything. Well, that's exactly where you fell, because you should have done something in that situation. So we need to deal with the consequences of the things that you have done, and you have to deal with the consequence of the things that you did not do and you should have done. And France collectively, right, as the people of France, need to deal with this collective trials, as Kardec puts of it, as Emmanuel puts of it here. Have to deal with the consequences of it, action and inaction. Okay, the action to had allowed Napoleon to disqualify or to change the noble objectives of the French Revolution and try to become an emperor and conquer the whole Europe, to reestablish what was the Roman Empire that would, if had succeeded, would be the French Empire, right? If eventually, as will always happen, even if it takes a long time, they will be defeated. In this movement, once Napoleon was finally defeated, there was also a very hard period of the so-called the reign of terror, in which about 17,000 people was guillotined in public, about 300,000 people was condemned without proper public judgment proceedings, about I think something of 20,000 people missing. God knows what happened today, besides the 17,000 who was guillotined in public. There was a horrible reign of terror that France would have to deal with that. Those massacres, those guillotines, those be happening in public and with people applauding and saying that this is the right thing to be done. And France had to deal with this. And more important, eventually later has to engage in a war with the Prussian Empire, and lost that war. And then Germany, of course, become intoxicated by power again, and consequences, the First World War, 1914-1918. So what Emmanuel is showing is, I stand in the beginning here, that the divine spirituality is here to help us, is help to guide us, is here to remind us of what is our objective here. And they will do so, but without interfering with our decisions, which I will seek to do. If you seek to ignore their recommendations, their inspirations, and focus ourselves in purely material, bellical power, they will not stop us. I don't know if they could, if they wanted, but regardless, they will not stop us. We have a free will, but we're gonna have to deal with the consequences of those actions. And France had to deal with the multiple consequences, perhaps uncertain to these days. To this day, it still deals with the consequence of its mistakes. We all deal, you know, those mistakes generated perhaps somehow the first Great War, and the first Great War is the cause of the second big war. The second big war is perhaps led to the Cold War, and that's where we are today. It's a sequence of events that we are being tried. There are going to, some of us are repairing the mistakes. And as we all do, France has to deal, because no one will be denied the opportunity to repair, to clear the conscience, to clear the mistakes of the past. It's an opportunity to growth that we need. And France, of course, had to go through their own trials and expiations, has done, it's still doing it, and it spreads throughout the world that we all have a degree of responsibility in basically everything. Questions, comments? Okay. So, trials of the church.
Yes. Approaching the year 1870, which would mark the bankruptcy of the church with the declaration of the infallibility of the Pope, Catholicism experienced bitterly painful trials. Weary of the church's impositions, all the enlightened peoples of Europe regarded its institutions as nothing more than religious schools that limited their educational purposes and controlled the mechanism of their activities. Realizing that Christ did not hold a monopoly on any earthly lands, the Italians claimed their rights and sought to organize a unified Italy without the guardianship of the Vatican. The fighting, ongoing since 1859, had been extended for quite some time due to France's decision to maintain a whole army in Rome to safeguard the papacy. But the situation of 1870 forced the French people to call back the guards of the Vatican, giving victory to the ideas of Calvo, depriving the Pope of all his temporal powers, and limiting his material possessions. The Church's great lesson began with Pius IX, a period of great transformation was just beginning, and the Church, which had always dictated orders to the rulers of the world in its thirst for domination, would be made into an instrument of oppression in the hands of the powerful. An interesting phenomenon could be observed. The Church had never given a royal title to the figure of Christ, but as soon as it saw the thrones of absolutism crumble with the victories of the Republic and the law, it built the image of the King Christ for the top of its altars.
Okay.
Okay.
So, if individuals and nations have to, or have the opportunity, have the blessed opportunity to repair mistakes through trials, through expiations, so does institutions. Okay, so if Apple or Samsung or Honda or Toyota, as big companies, are committed some kind of crime against the divine laws, as an institution, they would have to deal with the consequence of those actions. So does a church, which is another institution, okay? If it have committed any crimes against the moral law, against the divine laws, would have the opportunity to repent, repair, progress. And exactly what happened to the church, what's happening to the church, you can see nowadays, today, is what's happening with the church. It's visible to everyone's eyes that the church is dealing with some difficult trials right now, which hopefully lead to progress, leads to stabilization, and because we need the church to be strong as a instrument at the hands of Christ to spread his teachings, not to conquer power, not to conquer anything, but to spread the teachings of Christ. That would be a great ally of Christ and would work in conjunction with spiritualism. That is their goal, of course. Don't know really all the historical factors over here. Could not mention each one by each one. But what happened at the time also is that finally the governments of the countries have decided to create a separation of government and church. And that was what the biggest, what they call the declaration of infallibility of the Pope. Now the church may have a strong hold on individuals with the dogmas, but no longer with a nation, would no longer be the institution that the government would have to run this idea by and be approved or disapproved, because up to them the Pope made decisions. Okay, when Portugal and Brazil was fighting about the lands being discovered, the Pope decided to create a Tordesilhas line, and that create a fictional line between 2 points and divide everything. From this side belongs to Portugal, and on the other side belongs to Spain, because the Pope made all those decisions. The Pope was really the one who reigned out his authority over most of the countries in Europe. At that point, now that the government said no longer, we are elected by the people, and we will govern regardless of the position of the Pope. So the position of the Pope becomes extremely limited to the Vatican. Still strong, still has some power, but this power now is more diplomatic than imposed. The Vatican at a point have a strong, powerful army. It no longer has that. After 1870, that was changed. The countries would send their soldiers to be the Vatican army, retrieve those soldiers, put them back in their own countries. The Vatican is today an independent country, perhaps the richest country in the world, by far the richest country in the world, but does not have that political power that among us people anymore. And again, they're not stupid. They saw the changing coming, they make some adjustments, and they are making adjustments. And once they don't make that adjustment, they go to difficulties, they lose a great number of followers, as has been happening continuously. Now we got this Pope now who see this tide, this wave that is uncontrollable, and learn how to ride it and try to bring more reason into the church, And with success, having people going back to the church now because of this more reasonable approach to the way it's functioned. Not able to remove all the dogmas yet, and he leaves it clearly that he does not agree with some of them, but it's too early for him to go and make some more drastic changes. It has to happen slowly. When he says, "Who am I to condemn homosexualism?" That's a big, big step, because after them was seriously condemned. Us, you know, if I'm not gonna marry homosexuals in my church, at least don't condemn anymore. That's already a big turn over there, because not too long ago they would be condemned to hell. No, they're not being judged anymore. So these changes are happening. It will continue to happen. And the biggest change happened when they lost their political power through the greatest nations, when they say, now we're going to govern ourselves and we will not allow the Pope to interfere with our decision making. Okay? Are we done? We're done with the chapter. Oh, I realized that.
Yes.
Not done. I'm not going to start the next chapter today.
Yeah.
For one reason, I did not prepare myself for it. I didn't expect to even finish this one. I thought there is enough material here for us to discuss. João will be back here next Sunday. He'll give continuation of the book next month. Is there any questions, any comments of everything that we discussed here today? Okay, so the important thing is to keep in mind here that our progress is certain and guaranteed by the law of progress. But that's the only guarantee that we have. How to get there, it really is up to us. That's where our free will works. We are going to move from the point of simple ignorance to absolute perfection. And there is thousands of pathways to get there. How quick, how slow, it's up to us. And if the progress happens individually, each one does our part, we move collectively as well. Right? I mean, it's not fair that I will not be able to take a step up because everybody else will step lower. And it's not fair that after all of us put our effort, that it just brings someone up without doing the effort, because that person will not fit in there, will not belong there, you'll be an alien in that community. That's why we have this separations of individuals at different level of progress. That's why you have different celestial bodies where individuals you gather according to what they need, and more equally important, what they have to give. We're always talking about what we did, but what we have to give is equally important. And what this book tells us is exactly that. In this pathway that we are going through, exercising our free will, that collectively leads to the progress of the planet, leads to the progress of the planet from trials and expiation to the point of regeneration, what would be somewhat the light, or the light that we can see right now. Of course, there is many brighter lights ahead. those who are able to move faster, they move fast and they get out of here and they are already in better planets than ours. Those who cannot keep up with the pace, we're going to have to go somewhere else. But it shows collectively here how we are transforming the planet from trials and expiations to a planet of regeneration. The steps that we had chosen to take that leads us into that direction. And for every decision that we make, we're going to have to deal with the consequences individually, collectively as a country, collectively as an institution. Either way, we're going to have to deal, not as a punishment, but as an opportunity of learning. And we can see today that we are making progress. People are not being decapitated in public with thousands applauded. Yes, we have the MMA on TV that is a representation of our ignorance, but less and less people are able to watch people beating up people and blood all over the place and think that it's good. And if someone is decapitated on public today, it'll be a tremendous aberration. It'll be a tremendous movement against it, more than pro. I'm sure there are going to be a half dozen who will applaud still, and likely that half a dozen will have to migrate somewhere else as the planet moves on the way to the light. Comments, questions? I'm going to ask Gary to make our prayer so we can close it.
Sure. Thank you very much. Really great lesson today. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Infinite Creator and Supreme Intelligence, all goodness and grace, we are grateful today to be together for our studies of the book On the Way to the Light. We've been studying chapter 23 about the 19th century, entitled After the Revolution. We have learned from the French Revolution of the terminology liberty, equality, and fraternity, which we hold dear to us even today. We know that through the revolution and afterwards, that knowledge is power, that we have learned that literature for all is very important, the expression of the arts, the sciences, philosophy, and of course, the freedom to worship is so major in the beliefs that we hold today and linking us certainly to spiritism. The church, of course, the Catholic Church lost some of its domination and power, and through it, the intellectual progress and the spiritual progress began to balance, and spirituality began to rise. We hope for a greater balance between them both. Spiritism is noted as the consoler of humankind. We are grateful for this, and we know that certainly through our studies, there is cause and consequence, and also consequences not only of our actions, but also of our inactions. We are individually progressing as well as collectively progressing to a planet of regeneration for which we do play a part. May we give thanks and gratitude to all of our guides, our spiritual mentors, our spiritual benefactors who are with us, guiding us, helping us, inspiring us to do our part, to pay greater attention to these studies and to put them into practice as we are able to each day. We are grateful for what we have learned and what we will continue to receive according to the blessings that not only we have sowed, but that we will reap as well. We are grateful for our studies, and may we continue with them throughout the week, and may we continue with our prayers and our mindfulness also. We humbly ask for the love, light, and peace of Christ to go with us today and this week, and may we receive these blessings in our minds and our hearts, and may we balance them out through our rational thinking also. As we close now this meeting, we humbly ask for safety and protection as we return to family, friends, loved ones, and our coworkers. We continue to be blessed throughout, and may we have greater understanding of what we have learned today. We close now and remind ourselves to be beacons of light. Go forth now in peace